on Australia's business channel. This is Mediaweek.
Hello, welcome to the program. Ahead, we'll meet the author of a new book lifting the lid on the machinations of our commercial television sector over the past decade. We'll also hear from the head of BBC Worldwide here in Australia about the launch of the broadcaster's iPlayer, and we ask if it gives viewers bang for their buck. Plus a surprise signing in radio and some long faces over media access to the Brownlow Medal. But first, the CEO of the Australian Financial Review has barely got his feet under the desk and he's already been on a major hiring spree. Not even 18 months ago, the Oz was crowing about poaching a raft of top talent from the Fin, including Brett Clegg and Damon Kitney. Well, Clegg lasted just 9 months before a shake-up at the AFR left the door open for him to return as CEO and publisher of the paper. He's since lured back Tracy Lee and James Chessel, but the biggest scalp came on Wednesday night. James Manning is the editor and publisher of Mediaweek and joins us now. James Manning, Michael Stutchbury going back to the AFR. Apparently they searched far and wide and they've come up with a boy who, that's where he came from to start
Yeah, I think he
with.
was there for about 16 years or something, so he knows the place pretty well. It was certainly game on back in that financial news sector for the two national newspapers. Been lots of slanging matches over the last couple of years. The Australian thought, and a lot of people thought, it was, they developed a huge stable of good writers. Now some of them are disappearing, so that the Fin's definitely making a play to lift its game.
Yeah, just reading the press release that came out with the announcement, Brett Clegg's obviously pretty keen on getting the AFR back to that sort of number one spot.
They're very upfront. They do talk about, a regeneration of ideas and talent, and just make it a better paper, more competitive.
Interesting to see what happens. Well, we've got more woes for News Limited, which is considering whether to appeal a decision which found columnist Andrew Bolt had breached the Racial Discrimination Act. The case revolved around two articles which appeared in the Herald Sun, suggesting some fair-skinned Aborigines had chosen to identify themselves as Aboriginal for financial and professional gain.
This is a terrible day for free speech in this country.
It's never been an issue of free speech. It's always been about professionalism and integrity.
An editorial in today's Herald Sun backs Mr Bolt, saying his comments were a justifiable exercise of freedom of expression under the Racial Discrimination Act. James, what did you make of this?
Yeah, well, any sort of court decision that sort of impinges on what a columnist can write, I guess, makes you a little bit nervous. But it's interesting seeing the rivalry again between Fairfax and News Limited. The Fairfax had a different take on it this morning, with columnists highlighting the fact that, look, they thought Bong was wrong with his facts, Bolt was wrong with his facts, and so they didn't see it as black and white as the Herald Sun did, of course.
Okay. Waiting for news, of course, on whether there will be an appeal by News. Still in the News Corp camp, UK Labor delegates have backed a call for James Murdoch to quit as chairman of B-Sky-B. The unanimous vote was passed at the party's conference in Liverpool, a motion demanding Mr Murdoch resign over the hacking scandal at the News of the World. I'm not really sure that the politicians can force anything to happen anyway, but it's, they've come out and said this is what we...
Absolutely. A bit of manoeuvring coming. I think the News AGM's coming up. I think it's in Los Angeles this year.
Right.
It's either next week or the week after, been early October, so trying to make a bit of noise and influence some shareholders before that.
All right. We should also note, of course, that B-Sky-B is a one-third owner of this network. Well, to something a little different now, a book released this week claims to lift the lid on the ins and outs of Australia's commercial television networks over the past decade. It's been authored by Michael Bodie, a TV and film writer with The Australian, and he's in our Melbourne studio. Michael, good to see you.
You too, guys.
I guess if we can start, just tell us a bit, give us a synopsis, I suppose, if you can, of the book. There's lots of egos, money, power.
Yeah, it was sort of a reaction to the, I suppose, the lament of the baby boomers when Kerry Packer died, that TV would die with him in this country. It hasn't, obviously, and it's probably stronger than ever. We're seeing increased ad rates for TV in America, and the big event TV in Australia is really working. So, and multi-channel, something that they were all the networks were dragged kicking and screaming into, has worked for them as well. So I just was a bit flummoxed and distressed by the whole view that TV was better in the 80s or 90s, and it's not. Audiences are better served by broader choice, better technology, and more targeted programming these days. So I look back and I decided, the 2005 to 2007 broadcast war between 7 and 9 was pretty interesting, but in a way you had to go back and chart 7's story, because the history of TV has been told by people from 9. And 7's corporate story from 2000, when it was an absolute basket case of a network, to where they are today, which is the dominant network and no sign of losing that position, is a fascinating story. And of course you've got all the tangents, which I had to be very disciplined about sort of keeping in control. Yeah, so it is about the money and the corporations, but really also the stars and the shows.
Sorry, Michael, there's some really interesting little nuggets in there, particularly about, when you've got David Leckie coming from 9 across to 7 and all those management changes between the two big networks.
Yeah, it was a transformative time, and I think we're going through it as well. I think back in the sort of early 2000s, 2003, there was a bit of change going on between 7, 9 and 10. 10 sort of changing their whole strategy. But today we're seeing a generational change with James Warburton coming into 10, David Gyngell taking over 9 again, and who knows what happening at 7 over the next 2 years. And I think that's really going to change not only the way the networks do business, but it might even change what audiences see on TV. So I think it's very exciting at the moment, and I'm sort of glad in a way the circumstances within the TV landscape have sort of aligned with the book in the last 6 months. It's been great.
Michael, we all love reading about this stuff. You mentioned then James Warburton coming to 10. The book's largely about 9 and 7, because I guess the harder you fight for the bigger the revenue. Is it going to be hard for Warburton and 10 to make a mark, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure. It's everyone thinks 7's success was all about a bit of luck when they got those US shows from ABC Disney, and then Leighton Hewitt had a good Australian Open, but it has been good management, and Warburton was key and quite instrumental in 7 turning lots of eyeballs into lots of money. So I think he's, on the revenue side, I think he'll be very instrumental in getting 10 closer to 9 and 7 in terms of revenue. The big question is whether the sales guy, Warburton, has the programming now. He's got a good programmer under him, David Mott, but whether he has the creative strategies to get the audience on board 10 and sort of move it from the youth network to something much broader and more profitable, that's the big question. In the book, one of the revelations is Channel 9 tried to poach him years ago. So, there's people within the TV industry who think Warburton's a good bet. 10 have got him now, and next year's going to prove what he's got.
One of the interesting stories that you write about is the role of the PR people within the networks and the amount of influence that they actually exert on journalists and people who write and commentate on the media.
Yeah, it's 7's strategy was all about programming and fixing their revenues up and advertising, but they also had a strategy to chip away in the PR sense at Channel 9. They knew that they were number 2, so they could sneak up from behind, and they literally from 2006 to 2008 had a pretty damaging and concerted campaign against 9. At times it got a bit malicious, I think, and what was a collegiate industry, I think, lost a lot of that over that period during the broadcast wars, but it did help them. I mean, 9 became the story, and every stuff up at 9 became a huge story. And I remember I was at the Daily Telegraph when Packer died and when Eddie Maguire came in, and they were the big story. And 9 was always going to be a big news story as long as a Packer was involved, because the media loves the Packers as an Australian story. And so 7 took advantage of that and really chipped away at the imperious nature that 9 had as a brand leader. And some would argue, James, you might argue, or that 7 in some respects has taken over 9's mantle as the imperious leader, and in some respects looks like the arrogant network leader that 9 once was.
It's just interesting too that when you talk about the egos involved in the management of the networks, we think about perhaps David Leckie handing over the mantle, not too distant future. Who do you think that will go to? And you need that bit of sort of creative input as well as a sales strength to lead a network?
Well, it's an interesting one because the big CEOs in Australian television, whether it's Leckie or Chisholm, even the 10 guys, have all, Blackley, have all come through the sales departments, and that was sort of the road to the top office until Eddie Maguire came along, and that was a big risk. And Eddie was a star, and Eddie sort of was all about himself and wasn't quite involved in the revenues and the corporate stuff that you have to do. I'm not sure how it's going to shake out with. I assume Tim Warner will take over David Leckie's role when and if he does leave, and that's going to be an interesting one because Tim comes from the programming side, obviously, and development, and that has been a bedrock of Seven's rise over the last few years, their investment in Australian programming. Now, the thing Seven has in its favour, Leckie and Warner have a terrific sales team still underneath Warburton, and Warburton in a way will regret the strong national sales team he's created, because I don't think Seven's really going to miss a beat without Leckie if and when he goes.
All right, Michael Bodie, good luck with the book and thanks for talking to us. It's an interesting read.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Now let's take a check on the media sector's performance on the share market this week. Here's Chris Weston from IG Markets in Melbourne.
Yeah, good afternoon, Carly. We've seen a bit of a mixed picture. I mean, the broader market over the last 5 days since last Thursday is up about 0.5%. The likes of Fairfax is down 1.8% over the last 5 days, and we've seen 10 down 1.1%. But the rest of the space is actually doing quite well. News Corp over the last 5 days up 1.8%. Ozstar seems to be the big standout, shining light, up 5%. And Consolidated Media up about 0.8% as well. Now, if you look at Fairfax, I've been talking about it the last few weeks, and everyone seems to be warming to the stock. We did see wealth manager IOOF actually coming out and buying a 5% stake over the last couple of days, which is important and interesting, certainly. CBA seemed to be the next broker who's suggested positivity, and they said if you've got a 6 to 12 month view, the stock's very good buying at these levels. It's suggesting that the worst case scenario has been priced in, and if you look at their price target of 109, it's a pretty decent return if you include dividends as well. Now, they're very excited because of the potential asset sales and the idea of capital management initiatives that are coming through. So that's an interesting development. The other one is APN. They came out with an interim report yesterday. Their CEO, they're suggesting they're coming into the strongest part of the year, and that the actual forward-looking bookings up until Christmas were very, very strong indeed. Now, that's a good sign. We need these media companies to acknowledge this, because it's reported that about a third of their full-year EBIT, their interest before, so their earnings before interest and tax, actually a third of that comes from that last quarter alone. So that's a very important time for these media companies and the advertising booking. So that was an important scenario that played through. The other situation is Seek. The stock's been under a bit of pressure. I mean, it's up 2.7% this week. We did see CLSA, one of the big brokers, suggesting that the stock's really good buying at this level and actually should outperform on a 12-month view. They said unless you've got a view that unemployment in Australia is going to peak out and top above 6%, then, as I say, the stock should be good buying from here. But a bit of a mixed picture, but the bulk of stocks actually outperforming over the last 5 days.
Chris Weston there. Well, coming up on Media Week, no rest for the wicked. Merrick Watts signs up at Triple M, practically on his way out the door from DMG. More on the surprise signing in a moment.